So my name is Duje Dorotka. I come here from Hvar Island. I'm a curator of the Jelsa Municipal Museum. I've been doing that for the last few years, actually since 2011. When I came, I actually took charge of the care of our fishermen's collection in Vrboska. And this presentation today that I will show here will actually be about this, is a part of this research that continuing research actually, that I did on the island of Hvar, partially by ethnographic research, by fieldwork, partially of course by literature, but here the focus will be on some of the resources that were used in fishing throughout history, all up until the 20th century, when this type of fishing, sardine fishing, actually loses its economical importance, at least in the sense that it had in the times before. Okay, so the main resource that I will be talking about today is the pine wood. Today in Dalmatia we have two species of pine wood present. One of them, this one on the right, is the black pine, called also the Dalmatian black pine, which is the indigenous species of pine wood present in Dalmatia. However, today it's unfortunately present practically only in traces. Mostly biggest concentrations that aren't that big actually are on central Dalmatian islands, Vis, Hvar, Korčula. And on the left one is the Aleppo pine that was brought here, into Dalmatia, mostly with forestation actions that took place mostly in the first half of the 20th century. They were brought here, of course, mostly because we took down most of the indigenous pine, and in the rest of this presentation I will be mostly talking about some reasons related with some reasons with the focus on maritime practices that led to this quite big problem towards the end of the 19th century. I will just for start go through a few uses of the pine wood, since it was really a versatile resource in the past. So one of the uses was, of course, in boat building. Boat building, of course, included a number of different types of wood. All of the structural parts that had to be quite sturdy were mostly from other types of wood, hardwoods such as oaks and some other types. However, pine wood was also quite often used for these other parts, most notably for the plating of the boat, so for these sides. For these sides of the boat, pine wood is a soft wood, which means it's pretty easy to work with. It's pretty easy to take down the material and to shape it in the shape that you like. But it's also very, very sturdy and good for these practices as well. I would just like to show this aspect of using pine wood through a project that my museum did in the last few years, where we together, of course, with a few partners, mainly the local association from Vrboska called Lantina, which is an association for preservation of traditional fishing boats in Vrboska, that they have around 17, I think, boats that are really well preserved and put into touristical, but also in their original fishing practices. They were included, of course, and this wouldn't be possible if we didn't have, which is a very rare situation in Dalmatia, except from some boat building centers such as Murter, Korčula. We have in Vrboska a boat builder called Jure Kotoraš, so we managed to keep everything as local and possible. The idea was that everything was done in the most traditional way possible. So the pine wood was cut down in the nearby forests in Vrboska, and the processing was pretty much everything. I mean, not completely, of course, but everything that could be done with simple hand tools was done like that. So this is the owner, Damir Krstinic, who was very involved in the process himself. You can see him and the boat builder Jure, debarking, milling, and then later just straightening these planks. You can see that they are very happy on all of these pictures. And after we skip a few steps, this was the final result. So this was the renovated boat Angelina that was launched just 2 months ago in Vrboska. There are still a few details to do, such as the mast, the sail, and some other things, but the boat itself is pretty much done. And for this presentation, I put this fact underneath the picture, that for a building of one Gaeta boat, most common traditional Dalmatian fishing boat, about 4 to 5 square meters of wood was used. Only part of it, as I said, I don't know the exact amount, maybe some 30 to 50% was pine wood. If we take into consideration that the boat was throughout history something very valuable, it's something that lasted for hopefully at least a few decades, this wasn't quite a big consumption. One other aspect of using pine wood, again related with boat building, is collecting the pine resin. This is one photograph from the conservation document of Stari Grad Plain that we have already mentioned. This is a location called Varbonske Rudine near Vrbanj, and this is a reconstruction of the old method of collecting that pine resin, which was quite a valuable material, and it's also included in some toponyms. The most famous one, of course, are the Pakleni Islands or the Paklinski Islands near the shores of Hvar, sometimes wrongly translated as Hell Island, since Pakal or Pakao is hell, but Paklina is actually the resin. So that was also quite common there in the past, but in Stari Grad Plain as well. Just a second. Another interesting, I'm missing one slide, and it was just an old picture. Another interesting use of pine wood was extracting the pigment from the bark. This was used for dyeing and impregnating the fishing nets in the era when they were made from natural materials, which was pretty much all up until the 60s, maybe even in the 70s, when nets were made from natural materials such as hemp, flax, or cotton. So when they were new, they were very white. This was problematic because of two reasons. One of them is that they were quite fragile, especially the big nets that were pulled that were going against the sea bottom. They would quite easily tear down. And the other one is when the net is white, it's quite visible in the sea, and for the fish it's easier to see it, and it is not that good at catching fish. So what the fishermen did, this traditional method, was collecting pine bark, extracting the pigment, and dyeing the fishing nets with it. This can also be presented by this one workshop that we did last year with children in fishermen's collection in Vrboska. So this was the first step, the only step that I did myself, because I just didn't like the idea of children wielding axes. So we were I went into the forest, and with the instructions of some older fishermen from Vrboska, I took down some of the bark. It's interesting how a lot of them said that you have to, one of the first things was you have to take down only the outer part of the bark. You must not go too deep, not to injure the tree, which is something, again, very symptomatic. That's not just because of ecological awareness or reasons, it's because not to injure the pine, because you need pine for other things. So just the outer part of the bark is collected. The bigger the tree, of course, the thicker the bark. So we just take that. Then I took it to the museum, and the children were, of course, quite enthusiastic about smashing this bark. And as you can see, some of these pictures. After which we filtered it to get this really, really fine dust. We cooked it in a big pots in front of the museum, and then we just soaked these T-shirts like the one that I'm wearing right now, and the final result was this color. So, since you can't, present children in these kind of occasions, this is my friend and colleague who works as a guide during the summer in our Fishermen's Museum, Mario Franicevic, and also the president of that Lantina Association of Traditional Boats that I was mentioning. But it's really interesting color, and he also said that even after a few washings, the color was still quite well preserved. Now the third, and for this presentation the most important aspect of using pine wood in these traditional maritime practices was for sardine fishing with these large nets called shore seines and artificial lights. But not to waste too many words, I would like to show you this video, a short animated video that we made. Actually, that this young student of animation from Warboska also made for us, and it's, as far as I know, the only visual representation of this very old and archaic and abandoned type of fishing, which pretty much fed Dalmatia throughout its history. Just a second. This was actually quite a complex fishing operation that included at least around 15 to 20 people. It included a really well-defined social hierarchy and the division of tasks between the fishermen. Each one of them had their own function. That would be another complete lecture. But just to make things clear, so the fish, the small pelagic fish such as sardine, is attracted to light, and a long time ago in history, fishermen actually discovered a way to capitalize this, so just to take this information into their to make it into profit, of course. The first fishing lights, as you could see in the movie, used for this type of fishing were these kinds of very archaic and very simple devices called, they have a number of names throughout the coast. In Vrbovska, they are called svičalo. So they come also in various shapes and sizes. This is quite a large one. You can imagine that a lot of wood would be burned during just one fishing season. This is an illustration of how it used to look, that process. So there were usually 3 people in that boat. One was in charge of the light, one was in charge for the navigation, and one was just for helping around the boat. To say just a few things about the history of this type of fishing, the first mentioning of it is in the Statute of Dubrovnik from the 13th century. Unfortunately, couldn't find an English version, so here is a Croatian one, and if somebody has trouble with Croatian, here's a Latin one as well here. But it's interesting, nevertheless, to look at the Latin one, because in Croatian version it's translated fishing in the night with light. However, in the Latin, it doesn't say with the light, but it says cum igne, literally with fire. So it's even more informative. And this type of fishing was actually the main reason for settling of coastal Dalmatia in the 16th century. So we usually take fishing practice as something very archaic and something that was always present in Dalmatia, which is true. However, the economical value of fishing was not before the 16th century. Only in the 16th century this becomes a really important economical branch. This is because of two reasons that are really easy to explain in the situation on the island of Hvar. We already mentioned the Stari Grad plain, which is the most fertile piece of land in all of the Dalmatian islands, and the people were traditionally oriented to agriculture, so growing wine, growing olives, but also some forgotten cultures today on the island, such as wheat and other things. And it wasn't necessary to actually indulge in fishing more than occasionally. However, there is another reason, which is throughout the Middle Ages, of course, life on the sea was quite dangerous. As much as the sea was always the main communication channel between the Mediterranean people, so for exchanging people's goods, ideas, and other things, of course, it was also present a danger of various conquerors, various pirates, whether domestic ones, Omiš Neretva, or the Saracen pirates, as we today call them. So it was life was mostly going on the inland, on the shore and on the islands as well. In the 16th century, when Venice stabilizes its rule a little bit here, the situation becomes a little bit better. This era is sometimes in literature called as the Pax Venetiana, which is a little bit of an overstatement. It wasn't that peaceful, of course, but it was definitely better than throughout the Middle Ages. And then when all of these small settlements, such as Vrbovska, start to emerge on the shores. For Vrbovska, it's really interesting because we have a document referring to that. It is this letter from 1505 sent to the bishop by a pastor of the nearby inland villages, Nikola Sarjanic. He was complaining how his population is moving to Vrbovska, and he literally says they are moving there because of sardine fishing. So that was really a big and important practice in those times. Now, just to get a few numbers that are actually quite shocking when you think about it. So in the by some estimates, of course, these are very general information. If anybody needs references, we can talk later. In the early 16th century, there were approximately 400 of these nets on the Eastern Adriatic, and each one of them burned 100 to 120 cubic meters of wood in one fishing season, so in 1 year. The fishing season for sardine was usually from May to October, sometimes even from a little bit earlier and a little bit later. And it was done in each of the months, in the half of the month where you have the least moon on the sky, which is why for the lights to be more effective, of course. So around 40,000 cubic meters of wood was consumed each year in the 16th century. This number, of course, grew towards the 19th century. And just to put things in a little bit more into perspective, we said that one fishing boat consumes about 5 cubic meters of wood. So when you do the math, you get to a fact that each of those boats in one fishing season consumes wood enough to build 20 to 25 of those boats. We said that boats last for at least a few decades. This is just one season, literally into air. You put each boat 100 to 120 cubic meters of wood. That's how we got to this pretty problematic situation towards the end of the 19th century. These are two. The upper picture is an old postcard around 1910. We know that it's from a workshop of this famous photographer, the first photographer on Hvar, called Petar Ruljancic. And you can see the hills above Jelsa, and they are pretty much naked. For reference, I don't know if you can. The lower one is just some panoramic view I found online and cut it to approximately the same perspective. You can see this little church can be for orientation, so it's pretty much the same part. This is the situation today when you can see it's actually much greener. This problem is addressed, of course, by the most famous travel writers of Dalmatia, Alberto Fortis. He already, in his work from the 18th century, writes about naked islands, and in his, a little bit colonial manner, proposes better laws for forest protection and all of that. And by the end of the 19th century, it becomes really a serious issue. Now, just a few economical facts. So the price, this is at the very late 19th century, the price of 1 cubic meter of pine wood was about 5 forints, and the paycheck for an agricultural worker for hard work, so for digging all day in the vineyard, was 1 forint. So in 1 cubic meter was 5 days of working in the field. One of those nets with one of these fishing lamps consumed about 500 to 600 forints of wood per each fishing season, and the new net, which was sometimes more valuable than the boat itself, was approximately 400 forints. Except for the high prices, the logistics were also quite complicated. The fishermen usually imported wood from sometimes even from Italy, and I've heard from some people who remember the stories of people who remembered this type of fishing, that the people of Vrboska, the last ones that fished on these devices, actually gathered wood on the surrounding islands. So when you think about it, no engines on boats, no nothing. You have to go. It was hard on itself. You had to chop down the pine and everything, but you had to go to nearby islands, rowing or sailing, and then to come back to bring the wood, and then you can start your operation. So this was a really big crisis for the fishing industry, and that was the main industry of these small shoreside settlements such as Vrboska. At those times, the Austro-Hungarian naval government started giving incentives and rewards for various innovators to try to figure out and to invent some type of fishing light that would end these problems. And then various experiments started to emerge. This best documentation about this and best best evidence of this is this book by Petar Lorini, who pretty much writes about it in real time. So he was the state official for fishing, and he writes his book in an effort to make like a user manual for fishermen about various problems. And a few chapters are related exactly to this problem. So where to get pine wood, how much does it cost, where you can find better prices and things like that, which is from today's perspective, for anyone who is researching the fishing heritage, this is pretty much, the Bible, the main book. And one of the two quotes that I will show you is the one that pretty much illustrates what the atmosphere was like. You can read it for yourself. He says that even if you can find pine wood, it costs like an eye from the head. So very, very illustrative depiction of this problem. So I said that a lot of incentives and rewards were given to people to invent some other type of fishing light. One that's maybe, at least in the collectionary sense, the most valuable lamp in our collection is this one. I unfortunately don't have a newer picture. Now they are restored, they look a little bit nicer. However, this is a fishing lamp designed in Hvar in the 1860s by this local inventor called Vice Kovačević. It is, even Lorini writes about his attempt to end this problem. It didn't go well. It wasn't then that functional. It didn't give enough light. However, there are only 2 of these lights ever produced. One of them is in our museum in Vrboska, and the other one is in the Maritime Museum in Trieste. Since when he designed his lamp, he made one for the investor, which is a famous fishing family, Maričić from Hvar. They had the first one, and the second one was made to try to patent it, and he sent it to Trieste. It didn't, as far as we know. I have a little bit of problem communicating with the museum in Trieste, but as far as I've come to know, the patent didn't go well, and it never came into general use because it wasn't that effective. But it's a really interesting story, and for us it's important because it's a local invention. However, the biggest invention did not come from Dalmatia, but it came actually right here from Rijeka. The revolution that ended this problem, that ended the problem with pine wood, was the acetylene lamp designed by Ivan Delaiti from Rijeka in 1898. Now, when I was researching for my purposes, I knew about his work, but now for this presentation I try to find a little bit more information about him. And I would just like to mention this as an incentive to any potential researchers in this room over here. Nothing is known about this man. He's a complete mystery. I didn't manage to find the date of the year of his birth or the year of his death. In all of the literature, he's exclusively mentioned as the inventor of the acetylene lamp, period. Nothing else. So, but this was a revolutionary invention that saved Dalmatian and generally Adriatic sardine fishing, and it's a shame that it's like that. I'll get into it a little bit later. This was the original blueprint. Later, he and Lorini became quite good friends. Lorini writes also a little bit about him, but not in a lot of detail. These are some of the acetylene lamps that we have in our collection. So this was the burning mechanism here. But the invention that actually that was necessary for the latest invention happened a few years earlier, and it was the invention of calcium carbide. That's something that probably everybody from every town and city that had a shipyard such as Rijeka or Split knows from their childhood, because this was a pretty common source of fun and pyrotechnics for a lot of the kids here. It's actually a very interesting compound. for those who maybe do not know, it looks like a plain rock, but and it's completely inert, inactive, not dangerous at all when it's dry. However, when it gets wet, it starts to react and produces this really highly flammable gas called acetylene, and all of the light is, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing it right, all of the light is ingenious, was in taming that pretty violent chemical reaction. So the carbide itself was invented in 1892 by this man over here, who got the nickname, of course, Thomas Carbide Wilson, and it was commercialized by Union Carbide Company in 1895. This is also one interesting fact, because you see that this was just 3 years before the light's invention, and it was quite a complicated machine. So he probably, as soon as it was invented, started experimenting with it. And what's also very interesting, that in 1897, an Austrian industrialist called Josef Kranz founds the biggest European carbide factory in Rijeka in Bosnia, called, as you can see here, I don't know German, so I won't try to pronounce it, which is actually the today's Bosnian electric company this was one of its predecessors. What's this word? I don't know. Okay. This is my maybe favorite quote from Lorini's book. So he and Delaiti together went to Dugi Otok, to Sali, to test this lamp, and then Lorini writes this, for me, like the most illustrative quote of them all, that pretty much illustrates the dimensions of panic that was in the air before this invention, and practically the relief after they did the first successful test. And during just 1 decade, this became a standard for fishing in all of the Eastern Adriatic. Just to the story about the development of fishing lights is much longer and has a lot more aspects to it. But just to conclude this story, this wasn't the last type, of course, of fishing lamps. Acetylene was the biggest revolution, definitely, and it saved the forests and saved the fishermen as well. However, it was a little bit dangerous, Any kind of clogging, any kind of leakage or anything meant a potential catastrophe on the boat. And I've talked to some people, again, who remember some other, that it was quite easy, as they say in Verboska, that it's žbaro, that it explodes, that it just burns. So it was, people still started, it was still in process to refine the right type of fishing light. And after a few decades, in the late 1930s, another type of fishing lamp emerged, which were the petroleum. Again, petroleum, but not in the sense that inventor from Hvar tried to put it in its liquid state, but now petroleum pumped with pumps, so that you get this vapor of petroleum that was sprayed into these special nets, light bulbs, that would be burning, which is pretty much today the standard. Not anymore for sardine fishing. So sardine fishing is today with this type that the movie shows is abandoned. There are new types of nets for that, called purse seines or plivarice, as we know them. But for some other types of fishing with artificial lights, this is today still the standard. Not anymore on petroleum gas, but on regular kitchen gas, propane, butane, and this is something that you can still see on the boats. And just for the end, I put this nice postcard from Verboska with an acetylene lamp in the first plan, and I think that it's very, very occasional for this presentation. I think that it should say, from Verboska to Rijeka with love. And thank you very much.